Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorraine Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is the new Senate Majority Floor Leader of the New Mexico State Senate, Senator Peter Wirth. Thank you so much.
It's good to be here, Lorraine.
Well, it's a kind of bittersweet situation that has landed you in this very important, pivotal job in the Senate. But let's look a little bit at your background. You were first appointed to the House. Tell us your background.
Yeah, so I was appointed in 2004. I had just won a 5-way Democratic primary to replace Max Call,
yes,
who was one of our great legislators and the history, really, of the state. And he had retired. I'd run in this competitive race. I won. And then he stepped aside, typical of his graciousness, to give me the 6 months of interim committees to get ready to go. So that's when we started, 2004 in the House. And
what was so important to me is, as a lawyer, you would obviously usually be appointed to a judiciary kind of committee, but they put you on House Appropriations and Finance, which is really crucial in terms of the state finances and budgeting. So you went right in with a budget point of view, and you learned how all the state fiscal matters are handled.
Yeah, it was pretty unusual to get appointed onto that committee, and I credit Representative Call for working on that and some others for making that happen. I was the only lawyer on the Appropriations Committee, and so I always got teased by the lawyers because I wasn't on the Judiciary Committee where you typically go. But it was an amazing time because, again, very different time fiscally. The state had lots of money. And so I'll always remember being a subcommittee of one dealing with the cultural affairs budget, something that's very important to me and to Santa Fe, and actually having money to move in different places and working with Secretary Ashman, and such a different time. But boy, you really have to understand the budget in this building, even if you're just running policy bills. And that's a Max Call lesson was you can have the best bill in the world, but without the money, it's not going anywhere.
So then in 2008, you moved over to the Senate, and you've been there, I think, starting 9 years now?
Correct, yeah. 9 years in the Senate, so my 13th year in the legislature.
Right. So tell me a little about your family background, because you really have quite a pedigree. So your grandfather, tell us.
So it's it's kind of both sides have really interesting New Mexico history. My grandfather on my mom's side was John Gamim, who was the architect really responsible for kind of Santa Fe style and the building people really relate. Zimmerman Library, Cristo Rey Church, things he did. He came to New Mexico in 1920 with tuberculosis and was in the sanitarium where the Carmelites are now in Santa Fe. And then on my dad's side, my dad, who's no longer alive, but he was always proud of the fact he was born in Dawson, New Mexico, now a ghost town. And so my grandfather had been up at the Los Alamos Ranch School before the war. And so that whole history of transition between an amazing boys' school that Oppenheimer went to, and that's how he learned about Los Alamos.
Gore Vidal also went to that boys' school.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. So it's a neat history on both sides.
Well, from the depth of your background in New Mexico, and one of your skills that you're frequently praised for and get awards for is your bipartisanship and your ability to draw people together, and that will be especially important now that you're the Senate Majority Floor Leader. I want to go back to your budget background. We are in such a fiscal mess. The state right now is in dire straits. How can you apply your work from when we had lots of money? What did you learn of that can be applied to this time when these terms are great, clawing back, sanding? We're doing anything we can to find this extra money. Talk about our budget situation and how it can be solved?
Well, it's a two-part problem, and what's unique for me and for many legislators, we've come in this session with an immediate crisis, so it's almost like we're in a special session at the beginning of a 60-day session. We're $69 million in the hole, and we've spent all our reserves. By statute, just like any family sitting at home around the table with their checkbook, you can't write checks when there's no money in the account and there's no reserves. So you saw the Senate this week on the second day, we actually passed 4 bills, solvency bills, which exactly, you're right, they're clawbacks, sweeps, transfers, one-time money. This is what's important. We passed those 4 bills off the floor of the House with almost unanimous votes. And you mentioned the bipartisanship. This is one of the things that I think is very important, especially when you're in a crisis like this. You can't get siloed into your specific positions, because it's one of those things where it's so bad that we have to hold hands and do this together. And in the Senate, you saw that last fall in the special session. We came in and Democrats and Republicans just took a lot of deep breaths and a lot of bad votes, but we did what we had to do. And so that's going to continue with the 2017. What we're trying to do is we need about $500 million between 17 and fiscal year 18. Fiscal year 17, just for your viewers, ends in 5 months. So we need to do that immediately. And it's getting the $69 million that we're short, plus putting some money in reserves. We have to have reserves. So we're trying to get to the $250 million number for 17, and then we go right back into 18. So budget this session.
I will tell you, I was so impressed this first week of the session to have this incredible focus on the solvency bills. I mean, I remember when we had the special session that was supposed to fix, the Senate went right on to the budget. The House was doing crime and punishment and social issues, and meanwhile the wolf was at the door in terms of our budget.
Yeah, the wolf's at the door, and unfortunately, about half the wolf is in the door.
Yeah.
That's what's scary.
Right. So there's many ways to shut the door on this wolf, one of which is cuts in spending, increasing revenue, and something that you fought for so long is closing some of these loopholes. I don't understand why, whenever there's been what's called a tax expenditure budget coming up, where we simply look at how many billion do we give away in exemptions and loopholes?
It's $1 billion in exemptions, deductions, credits.
That's the money we need right now. What is the resistance to looking at every tax break that we give and seeing whether there's a return on investment anymore?
Well, we need to do it, Lorene, and this is one of the things when you have a crisis of this magnitude. You're right, there's 3 ways we solve this. We can cut, we can raise taxes, and we can go into this bucket of loopholes, deductions, etc. I think the feeling in the Senate Democratic caucus is we need to look at all 3. And so, we're going to do that. I am encouraged that Governor Martinez, in her State of the State, talked about loopholes, and I've met with her, and we've had those conversations as well. We got here, this is back to my days in the House, every year we would roll out a Christmas tree bill, $100 million of exemptions all packaged together. And I always say, Democrats and Republicans, me included, we all voted for these, and it was a good time. And finally, it was actually Ken Martinez, a former speaker, who began to raise the flag and say, what are we doing?
And also former Senator Tim Keller. Every year he'd come in with this, and there have been proposals to look at these loopholes, and they've been vetoed by both Governor Richardson and Governor Martinez. So somebody doesn't want to look at this, except the times have changed and the need is so great. I think we need to. So
we have to.
Yeah.
We have to, and again, and remember to come up with the money, the new revenue. Because for 2018, we have to find recurring revenue. You can't sweep and take one-time money. It's got to be recurring. And so I just think we have 2 state representatives who've been working on an omnibus bill, Representative Jason Harper, a Republican from Rio Rancho, and Bill McCamley, a Democrat from Las Cruces. Senator Scherer's had this wild 2% bill, a massive restructure of the tax code. Those are big, big lifts, but there's no question we've got to find some way to find some new dollars, and the loopholes are a good one.
Well, the tax code, I remember when Governor Richardson formed the Blue Ribbon Tax Reform Task Force and had the best minds of our state working on this. They gave him his recommendations. Nothing happened.
He called a special session,
Yeah.
brought I wasn't there, but brought all the legislators in. The tax bills went nowhere. The only thing that passed was the legislation authorizing the rail runner in that special session.
Wow.
So it's tough.
Yeah.
Tax reform is tough because there's very strong every loophole's got a fighter who's going to try and protect it. And so
One area that you have fought in the past was the issue of corporate taxes and the unitary tax. Is that what it is?
Correct.
Explain that.
yeah, it's combined reporting. We're
Yeah.
the only Western state with a corporate tax that allows multi-state corporations to create subsidiaries in states like Delaware or Nevada where there's no corporate tax, and they expense profits and basically avoid paying their fair share of the New Mexico tax. So we've closed part of that. In 2013, we did the big box issue, was part of the omnibus tax bill in 2013, which the governor signed. So an example of one loophole that was partially shut. It's Senate Bill 1 this year, so we've introduced it again. Don't know if it'll fly, but I'm encouraged. I've had very good conversations with the tax department, so we may need to do this, continue to do it piece by piece till we get all the way, but perfect example of one that needs to get fixed.
We could do the whole show on this, but there's so many other things I want to talk to you about. You have been a leader in ethics reform. And again, this is something that sometimes passes the houses and then gets vetoed. I don't understand the resistance to transparency and to ethics reform. But will we ever get an independent ethics commission? It seems like with the new leadership in both houses that we might finally work toward that.
Yeah, I certainly have always supported it. I've carried the bills. When I was an interim chair on Courts Corrections Committee, we worked on a committee bill, and we've just never gotten it across the finish line. So there's different proposals this session. Senator Ivy Soto has a public accountability board. He's worked very hard on that. And, we just need to get the best minds outside and inside the building to get in a room and really try and get there. I will say that we also have to make sure it's properly funded, because remember, you don't want to create something when there's no money to make it, to implement it. So that's going to be a challenge. But I know Senator Ivy Soto has some ideas on that. And again, I'm going to keep pushing and again, being sensitive to the challenge of change.
Yeah.
And it takes some time. I was really encouraged, Lorene, on opening day, this body, the first thing we did was by unanimous consent, which means all the members supported it, the Senate adopted webcasting, archiving of webcasts. And that archiving was something that now Senator Steinborn had done in the House, and we did that in the Senate. So big step forward. And again, we're gonna work on this and move it forward.
We're speaking today with Santa Fe Democrat Senator Peter Wirth, who is now the Majority Floor Leader of the New Mexico Senate. I want our audience to realize that with the webcasting and the archiving, there is no reason not to watch and participate in your government. You can do it at your home computer. You can watch arguments about bills that you care about. You can watch really good government in action. And to finally make it archived so that if you couldn't catch it the morning of the floor session when the argument about a bill that you really were passionate about, you can go back on. It's just such a step for good government and transparency. I want to thank you so much. Two other little side issues on transparency. Are we ever going to have an election commission and redistricting? I know that this is something that former President Obama will be working on, is a redistricting issue. But are we going to be able to do any election reform? And another thing you've worked on that I want you to talk about, campaign finance reform.
Yeah, that's a big one, and I think it's the fifth or sixth time now have introduced a bill to basically turn the lights on this dark money that now comes into our campaign process as a result of the U.S. Supreme Court decision in Citizens United 2010. And so we have unlimited money that's now at play. This unlimited money is not supposed to coordinate with the candidates, but guess what? We don't have the definition of coordination in our statute. So we have to fix this. And what we're trying to do is require disclosure of the donors so the voters know where the money's coming from. So this bill has passed the Senate unanimously 3 different times, and we just can't get it through the House. Last session, in a 30-day session, where you had to have a message from the governor, I was very encouraged we got the message, but we didn't get it till we were just starting the kind of midway through the 3rd week in a 4-week session. Yeah. It went through the Senate in 3 or 4 days and passed unanimously, and then it got held up in the State House kind of at the very last minute. It's a bill that Democrats and Republicans support, but there's also groups that are Democratic and Republican that have concerns about it because they're used to the rules the way they are. So I'm hoping this is the year, because we just went through a big election cycle with all that money at play, and we really need to do this.
You know, and it's huge amounts of money. It is, I mean, we just need, I know that the Secretary of State, the new Secretary of State, is looking at ways to make it easier for the campaigns themselves and the candidates themselves to file and to register. But it is true, it's a time of change, and we really have to ride with it. You know, this is an opportunity. Crisis is always an opportunity. One other crisis I'd like your opinion on. This last week, Chief Justice Daniels of the New Mexico Supreme Court came to speak to a joint session of the House and Senate saying, we need money. We can't pay our juries. We can't pay our DAs. And it's in the Constitution. We guarantee people a jury trial, a speedy trial. And if we can't give them a speedy trial, it's an issue of public safety. We're letting them go. So you have you introduced the first Senate joint memorial of the session. Tell me how we can possibly address the judicial crisis.
So a couple of it's a joint resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 1, and it's a proposed constitutional amendment where basically the courts have stepped forward and they've said there are places we can be more efficient in terms of appeals. Some of the old archaic language in our Constitution has appeals going through multiple levels. So you could have a misdemeanor case that has 3 different levels of appeal, yet you have a first-degree murder case where it's 1 level of appeal. It just doesn't make sense. So I really respect the fact that the courts are doing everything they can to save money, and they're coming forward with legislation that will save money by making it more efficient. But, Lorene, you're right, and Justice Daniels is right. We're on the edge of a constitutional cliff. And this is one of those situations where if the legislature doesn't fund, the courts will step in and basically state that what we're doing by not funding is unconstitutional. They've done it before. The Zuni lawsuit, which deals with public capital outlay for schools, the courts had to step in there, and we've spent $2 billion complying with that lawsuit. So we've got this issue with the courts. There's another ticking time bomb with public schools, a challenge to the sufficiency of funding for public schools. There's going to be a 3-month trial on that. And if the court comes in and says we're not sufficiently funding public schools, which is a constitutional requirement, we're going to have no choice but to find the revenues to do what the Constitution requires.
But you're having to find the revenues for everything. I mean, you are literally leaving no stone unturned.
That's right. And I just think at some point, citizens need to understand what's at stake. And Justice Daniels was amazing, our Chief Justice yesterday, emotional, just because he cares so deeply about these rights that exist in the Constitution. And we should all care. These are the rights that protect us at times from our government. He talked about jury fees. they're going to stop doing juries in March because we're out of money to pay the jurors. And so the jury is what protects all of us. If you're charged with a crime, the jury makes that decision. So, boy, it really hits home when you hear something like that. And I appreciate, the passion and the advocacy and everything that the courts are doing. But we need to step up with the courts and on a whole bunch of other places.
Well, there is one of your priorities as a body and yourself as a majority floor leader is jobs and the economy. So this is the bright, shining silver lining on the cloud, because if we can get more jobs and develop our do economic development, then we'll have more money coming in. So what are you and the Senate and the House going to do to open up this whole beautiful avenue for jobs in the economy?
Yeah, there's no question we need to diversify our economy. We're so dependent on oil and gas that, we're in the crisis because oil went from a little over $100 a barrel to $27 a barrel just almost overnight a year ago. So diversifying the economy is critical. You're going to see, as soon as we get through this solvency package, you're going to see the House Democrats and the House Democrats and Senate Democrats together rolling out a jobs package. I don't want to give away all the pieces yet because they're still moving, but there is no question that jobs and the economy are what the people of New Mexico are looking for. Again, we're at the bottom of every list, and it's not working. So we have got to encourage and figure out ways to get ourselves out of the hole we're in, and that means incentivizing and figuring out how to direct resources and things into our economy that will allow us to do that.
And everything should be on the table. I know at the end of last session they removed the tax credit for solar. I mean, this is a sector of our economy that is booming, and why take away that incentive? I know people who actually then did not go ahead with solar because they no longer had the tax credit. And I mean, there are just so many things. Hemp, industrial hemp. This is a really good crop that's appropriate for our water and weather. And I just think that everything should be on the table.
Well, and I think it's important that everything is on the table. When we get into this, and Senator McSorley with industrial hemp that bill's passed overwhelmingly with bipartisan support, including from very conservative farmers and ranchers on the east side who are very clear to distinguish it's not cannabis, it's industrial hemp. And so it does you mentioned, I mean, it's a water bill, it's an economic development bill. And, this is one that will definitely be up, I hope, on the governor's desk. And she's vetoed it a couple times. But, boy, we need to get that one done. And we'll see all kinds of discussions like this. And I think Democrats in the Senate and the House are really committed to moving forward common sense legislation that helps New Mexicans. And, we're going to send them up. And let's see what the governor wants to do.
Well, I know how hard you worked. I've followed your career for years, and I know how many of the lawmakers just go full tilt to do everything they can to move us forward. But we have a very active citizenry, and I'm wondering if you can, this is a kind of call. What I know people are saying, well, I want to help. What can I do? What can our viewers do? I mean, of course, we'd like to hire people. There's a lot of, but in terms of government and participation, what would you urge our viewers to do?
So I'll give the same speech I give to my constituents when we do town halls, etc. The legislature in New Mexico is one of the most open, accessible places and legislatures in the country. You can come right down onto the floor of the state Senate before we bang the gavel and come visit with me or any other senator. I assure you and your listeners that all the lobbyists are there.
Yeah.
So I always tell my constituents I'd rather talk to you than the lobbyists. So come meet with us. Come participate in the hearings on the bills you're interested in. It's a place where generally audience participation is encouraged and input. And so as a chair, when I was chairing Senate Conservation, we'd go out to the audience and, again, hearing from those different viewpoints, different input different parts of the state is incredibly important and can move the votes on legislation. So it's not a situation where you're kept away from the process. It's your process, quite frankly. All the citizens need to participate. I've been saying if you don't come over here and participate in some way, you really shouldn't complain.
Yes, exactly.
So we just need to get everybody involved, and I really encourage that.
And also, they can watch the webcasting and the archives of the webcasts. They can come here. The Capitol has got $6 million worth of art. It's a beautiful building. And I just think people, when they come here for the first time, they're so proud that this is our capital. And I interview a lot of writers and artists from around the world, and they come and say, this is the most beautiful capital we've ever seen. But the pride in seeing, as a citizen, observe something that they feel to be wrong, and to know that they can make a difference. New Mexico is a state where the individual can make a huge amount of difference. So I join you in urging people to come down. We got 7 more weeks of the legislature, so there's a lot to do. Give us a final call to action, or tell us what we should be looking for in this session.
Well, I'll say this. It's an incredible honor for me to have been given this chance by my Democratic colleagues to serve in a chamber where Democrats and Republicans talk to each other. We work together, really focus on what's in the best interests of our state. We've got a heavy lift this session. The budget crisis is severe. But we're going to work together and really move forward, and we need all of you to participate. And help us get to the other side of this and get ourselves out of the hole that unfortunately our great state that we love so much is dug into.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much. Our guest today is State Senator Peter Wirth, the new Senate Majority Floor Leader. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks, Lorene.
You bet. And I'd like to thank you, our audience, for taking the time to be with us this week on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.